Whether you're building a new home or adding on, framing up the situation, or putting a roof over your head, if you need to rock it, roll it, or just get on with it, Hometime has a video to help you do it right. Transform your small bathroom into a luxurious master bath, or increase your home's value by updating your old kitchen. Keep your drains draining, your switches switching, and your footing firm. Whether you do it yourself or buy it yourself, Hometime's how-to video guides will help you get the results you want. Will make your next project a success. See your local home improvement retailer for the Hometime video that's right for you. Well, welcome to Hometime. In this videotape, we're going to give you a thorough introduction to the basics of landscaping. We'll apply some of the principles we'll tell you on this tired old yard here.
The plan we'll be working on has been designed for this Cape Cod style home in a northern climate, but we'll be focusing on things that hold true for any yard and in any climate, including yours.
And we'll get started right after this. Hometime is made possible by Chevy full-size pickup, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickup on the road. The national PBS series Hometime is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley has been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right. At Hometime, we believe the best way to get the job done is to use the finest tools.
And this Chevy full-size pickup is one of our favorites. Equipped with an optional Vortec 5700 V8 engine, it generates 255 horsepower and 330 foot-pounds of torque to power you through the toughest jobs.
And with the optional third door, you've got lots of room for all your other tools.
And friends to help you use them.
At home or on the job site.
For work or play,
it's no wonder we at Hometime count on Chevy full-size pickups.
The most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickups on the road.
Before starting, let's first talk about what we had to work with here. The home was built in 1936 on what's basically 3 city lots. There were several mature trees and a lot of overgrown shrubs when we began an extensive remodeling project, which is now finished. The addition basically cut the backyard in half. And our goal now is to totally rework the landscape around the house.
We lost one of our big trees during construction, but we saved this one and made it the centerpiece of the new deck we built around it. This blending of the old tree, the new deck, and the new addition illustrates one of the basic principles of landscaping, incorporating the best features of the yard into your landscape plan. It's the plan we'll talk about next. A good plan is the most important factor in creating a good landscape. That's because it takes most do-it-yourselfers between 3 and 5 years to finish a big landscape. Well, first of all, it takes more than just a couple of weekends. Second of all, the plants and materials alone can run into the thousands of dollars, so it gets spread out over a few years.
Well, you definitely want to start working with a long-term plan. The last thing you want to do is the first year, let's say, go wild on a bunch of flowering shrubs, and the next year plant all kinds of evergreens. And the third year, well, decide that we'll build a deck where we planted half our evergreens last year. Without a long-term plan, you're going to end up spending a lot more dollars. Well, this was put together by Rosalie Town, who's a local designer for the nursery providing our plants. Let's get you oriented here. Well, this is the house, and this is the garage, and this is a deck we just finished building as the first part of our landscape job. Now, Rosalie filled in around the house and around the edges of the yard with a series of planting beds and dozens of plants. Now, this is definitely a 3 to 5 year plan, folks. Each of these symbols represents a type of tree or shrub, so you can see all the work it would involve. Well, for this videotape, we're going to focus on the beds around the house that would correspond to what you typically might do the first year in a new landscape, or maybe the first and second year.
The plants alone are running $3,000 for that part of the house. That's why it makes sense to execute the plan in stages and spread the cost out over a few years. But many nurseries like the one we're dealing with will provide a free plan like this, and others will give you a big discount if you buy all your plants and materials from them.
Now, it's definitely possible to draw up your own landscape plan since the basic principles of landscaping aren't that complex. So we're going to lay those out for you now. We're also going to show you how to put some of your ideas on paper. But not everything is covered by the basic principles. Like, for instance, what are the growing conditions in your area? What plants are available? So it's not a bad idea to check with a landscape pro in your area before you spend a lot of dollars on your own design. Now, the first consideration is the style of landscape that will work best with your property. Well, our house has kind of a cozy look to it, and Rosalie has enhanced that with an informal style in her design. That's where the beds have curves rather than straight lines, and where the plants seem to be placed almost at random. That's all very carefully planned though. You'll see it come together later on the tape, but right now let's take a look at a finished example of an informal landscape. This video shows a newly planted garden done in the English garden style. It was designed to harmonize with the architecture of the home, and it features mass plantings of shrubs and perennials with no formal borders between them.
Compare that to this garden, which shows the formal style of straight lines and perfect geometrical shapes. Featured here are a garden house, patio, and concrete stairs, which create a classical garden next to the house. The highlight is an aerial hedge, which follows the arc at the end of the patio. Here the plantings seem orderly, not random, and they're closely managed and pruned to maintain the formal effect. This formal garden is laid out for a somewhat different effect. The brick walkway forms a square leading to a circle of plants in the rear. That's the formal influence. But the flowers and shrubs are laid out in an English garden style with mass plantings of perennials and annuals and no formal borders between. So you can actually combine formal and informal styles in the same landscape.
This garden was just planted in the small backyard of a townhouse, and it shows an oriental style in its use of rocks, evergreens, and water. And a lot of different plants were used to create several perspectives. The highlight is a mock rock spring next to a formally shaped pom-pom juniper. And this one is done in a woodland style to blend in with the wooded backyard and the sloping terrain. Even though the waterfall looks natural, it's actually man-made and it operates with recirculated water. The terraced hill is planted with a variety of native and woodland plants, creating the type of natural rock garden you might see in the woods.
Okay, let's assume that you've decided which styles you like best. Your next consideration is what you want your landscape to do for your house and yard, besides make it look nicer. Here's where you want to start thinking about the function you want your landscape to perform, like creating new areas for play and leisure, increasing privacy, and blocking the sun, wind, or street noise. You should also think about ways to improve the view of your house from the street by framing it better or highlighting the entryway. But don't forget about the views from inside the house. If you have large windows or French doors, think about how you can improve the views you now have through them. The same would apply if there's a porch, patio, or a deck. If there's no outdoor seating area, you might include one in your new plan and then work on the view you'd have from that area. Finally, check out the rest of your neighborhood and try to imagine how your ideas would blend in with the other yards. There's a certain value in keeping a visual continuity between the houses, so you might think twice about anything that's wildly different. In fact, you might want to incorporate some of your neighbors' ideas in your own yard to promote continuity.
If you do that, then you'll be starting to think like a designer. But you also have to be thinking about some of the other materials that designers work with, the trees, shrubs, and flowers that actually make up the landscape. If you're going to plan your own landscape, you'll need a pretty good idea of which ones will work in your climate. Trees, shrubs, and flowers are all categorized by their plant hardiness, which means how well they perform in different climate extremes. North America has been divided into 10 climatic zones in the plant hardiness zone map put out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, with Zone 1 the coldest and Zone 10 the warmest. National plant reference guides and nursery catalogs will list the plant hardiness by zone. So once you determine the climatic zone you live in, you can figure out which of the plants will thrive in your part of North America. Your local nurseries will, of course, stock plants that are hardy to your climate. And if they do carry any non-hardy plants, they'll alert you to the special care those plants need to survive in your climate. In addition to the climate factor, there's also the sun factor for trees, shrubs, and flowers. Some need full sun, some need full shade, and they won't thrive in the opposite extreme. So plant guides and catalogs will also list the plant's sun or shade requirements, and that's something you have to consider in your planning.
The catalogs and guides also list the plant size at maturity, which is critical for proper spacing on your plan and in your yard. And this catalog also lists the time of year when the flower or shrub is in bloom. And that's a consideration when you're trying to maintain color in your yard through the entire growing season, spring, summer, and fall. The main thing to be concerned about is what your trees, shrubs, and flowers look like. Now, if you're like me, you look through one of these catalogs, you find dozens of things that you like, and then later on you forget what they were or where you found them. So we think it's a good idea to get extra copies of the catalogs if you can, and actually cut out the pictures of the plants you think might fit into your landscape. And cut out the plant descriptions too, so you know at a glance all the important facts. This step won't really help if you're just going to put in 20 lilac shrubs, all of the same variety. But it will help you keep a range of trees, shrubs, and flowers in mind if you plan to mix quite a few into your new landscape.
All right, we've got you thinking about landscape plants, styles, and functions. Now we want to turn those thoughts into a workable landscape plan. Well, first, you'll need some big sheets of paper because a plan should be to scale, with an 1/8 inch on the plan equaling a foot in the yard. That's typical scale. And you can get graph paper with the grids laid out in 1/8 inch scale. Well, these 3-sided rulers are handy too because they have this 1/8 inch scale marked off as feet, which means you don't have to convert all the measurements yourself. Just read them off the scale. Of course, you'll have to get all the measurements before you start drawing. If you're lucky, you'll have a blueprint left over from the construction with all that on it. Otherwise, you'll have to measure it yourself. You'll need the basics like the yard's length and width, plus the dimensions of your house. You'll also need a pretty good idea of where the house sits in the yard in relation to the boundaries of the property. Now, to be exact, measure from one corner of the house to a couple of landmarks, like a corner of the yard or a gate. Then after drawing out the perimeter of your yard and marking the landmarks, set a drafting compass to the measurements and draw an arc the proper distance from each landmark. The corner of the house would be where the arcs cross, and you can measure out the rest of the house from there. That's kind of an involved technique which you don't need for every landmark in the yard, but you should be pretty close on any existing features that will impact your new landscape. If your drawings look a little amateurish, don't worry. Just so long as the measurements are accurate and you can read everything when you're done, that's really all that matters.
Let's say that you've got your yard drawn and you want to try out some ideas on your new landscape. One tip that we've learned is to use tracing paper at this point so you don't have to redraw the yard over and over again. Now what I've drawn here is a hypothetical house and yard. It might not look like your yard, but as we step through a couple of likely plans for this house, we'll highlight the basic principles you can use in your yard. Let's start with an informal style. We'll first frame the front of the house with taller plants anchoring the corners. For example, a shade tree like an ash on one side and an ornamental tree like a flowering crab on the other. Not exactly symmetrical, but that's typical of informal landscapes. By the way, spreading these out a couple of feet will make a small house seem a bit bigger. The entry would be framed on each side with a group of taller deciduous shrubs like mock orange, reaching a height of 5 to 6 feet. Now a series of medium-sized shrubs along the foundation would cover any exposed block. One option would be spreading junipers, maturing at a height of 3 to 4 feet. Again, we don't want these too orderly to keep that informal style. To finish the beds off, we would use a series of short shrubs like spirea, mostly to round off the outside edges. And then we'd fill in here with a mass planting of perennials like a stobie. The finished plan shows how carefully planned the informal layout really is, despite the random look that it presents. Notice how we built each bed with the short plants in the front, the medium plants in the middle, and the taller plants in the back. Now that's a basic rule you should follow to keep all your plantings visible from the front.
Now we'll take the same basic house plan and treat the landscape a bit more formally. We're starting here with a low formal hedge. Alpine currant would be a nice choice, trimmed in this case to a height of 2 feet. We'd want to see pretty straight lines and square corners here, nothing rounded or curved. We'd frame the entry with a pair of upright conical evergreens, possibly Techni arborvitae. Along the foundation, we'd continue the geometrical sequence with a globe-shaped medium-sized shrub. One option would be a Japanese yew. For color, we'd fill in the middles of the beds with tall perennials that would be visible above the hedge. Daylilies come to mind for that. To finish this treatment, we'd anchor the corners of the house with a pair of ornamental trees, maybe a couple of flowering crabs, pruned to hold a globe shape. Well, this example shows the main features of a formal layout: straight lines, geometrical shapes, and a sense of balance or symmetry.
Well, let's look at some other landscape issues. Like if there was an immediate need for a privacy barrier with the neighbor's yard, we could put up an 8-foot privacy fence along the boundary. An alternative would be a hedge of tall shrubs like lilacs or arborvitae, but that would definitely take longer. A tall hedge like that would also be a way to soften a long, featureless wall on one side of the house. A row of evergreens on the north side of the house would provide a real nice wind barrier in the winter. And a few shade trees on the south side would eventually shade the house in the summer, but drop their leaves in the winter and let the sun warm the house.
We're not landscape designers, so we're not saying like these are great plans or anything, not at all. We're just trying to give you an idea of what to think about as you start jotting down your landscape plans. So, I think we're ready to get to work. You found the loppers, huh? I'm going to grab this rake so it doesn't fall off.
Yeah.
I have the
Great.
chainsaw all gassed up, so...
Well, the plants are all set and we're finally ready to start landscaping. Our basic plan is to lay out the planting beds, rip up the grass and put the plants in. But first we have to get rid of some tired old shrubs.
Well, these shrubs here are about 30 or 40 years old, and you can see they haven't exactly improved with time. Now, plants like this are supposed to frame the house. These are too flat, they're out too far from the house, and they're just plain too scraggly looking. So really about the only choice we have is to rip them out. Well, we're using garden hoses to lay out our planting beds here. They're flexible, so they work real well on laying out these irregular areas. We want everything to look sort of random once it's all planted. At the same time, a lot of thought goes into exactly how we're doing this. So we're trying to follow Rosalie's plan as closely as possible.
Okay, that's
right there.
4 feet, yeah. The nursery sent out these little rulers. They convert the 1/8-inch scale on the plan to feet, so it makes it easier to get our measurements. Like off the corner of this house, we want to get this curve here. So we take 3 measurements off the plan. We go 90 degrees off the corner of the house and we get 11. Then we go 45 degrees and we get 13. And another 90 degrees and we get 9. Now we put stakes in at those points and loop the hose around to match this curve. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, but we've got a lot of stuff to put in it, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Should be pretty big.
Well, that's true. Boy, it just looks kind of weird when you first start laying it out and see all the side you have to take up.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
Just
Okay, tweak this one a little bit here.
a bit. Yeah. Right. There. More. So
All right, how's this looking, do you think?
good.
You all set there?
Yep.
Okay, well, now that we have all the beds laid out, we're going to cut our sod down to the topsoil. Now, Robin's been edging around the outside here with a square nose spade. So to cut out the sod, we're going to be using our sod kicker here. It has this little blade that goes down to the depth of the roots of the sod. So it's just a matter of getting this blade started and then kicking it along as you go.
Moist sod is heavy, so getting rid of it is the hardest part. Well, you can always use it to cover up some bare spots in your lawn, or you can put it in a compost pile. I knew this one guy, to save time, he just turned it upside down in the bed and then buried it about 6 inches. The next year, he had grass coming back up through there. He's still pulling grass out of his bed, so you're best off just get rid of it completely. You all done?
Yeah, I'll set here. Now, a hose can get kicked around as you're laying it out here, so it's not a bad idea to spray in the line. Then it's there for good. As I mentioned before, the sod kicker is a pretty handy little item. With a little bit of luck, you should be able to find one of these at your local rental center.
Well, we've got all the beds laid out and cleared, and we're ready to install this plastic edging. Now, this isn't absolutely necessary, but it makes a good barrier for keeping the grass from invading the beds.
It's made out of plastic with this round bead on the top that stays above the surface. This separates out the planting beds. And this web here, the bottom portion, let me get this up here, this web portion gets buried under the ground. And these grooves tend to anchor the edging in the ground since the edging has a tendency to work itself out of the ground during winter frost heaves.
Sometimes this edging can be a little stiff or twisty if it comes in a coil. So you might want to lay it out in the sun for a few minutes until you're ready to work with it. There we go.
Here's another load. If you want to grab that end. While the strips have been warming up out in the sun, I've been digging a trench here to bury the edging. I'm going down 6 inches, which should do a good job in accommodating the depth. Now, the depth of the edging itself will vary. More expensive stuff going 4 to 6 inches into the ground. If your winters bring a lot of freezing weather, try to get the deepest edging available, because that resists heaving a lot better.
I've seen this edging come in strips 60 feet long, but these 20-footers are pretty common. Can you grab that for me?
Yeah, I got it here.
Okay, once it's manageable, you just put it into the trench with the bead the same height as the lawn.
Well, once we have the edging in the trench, it's a good idea to stake it in place. And we do that at each one of the ends and about every 10 feet or so. Then we can brush some of the dirt back in and cover up the bottom of the edging.
These come with plastic connectors for splicing, but they can still separate after a couple of winters. So to strengthen the joints, we cut back the bead a few inches to allow us to double up the web. Here you go.
Now the webs will overlap the amount that Robin cut the bead. We have our connector here in the middle, and that'll hold everything in a straight line here. And then I'll just run a stake right through both of the webs, and that'll really hold everything in place very nicely. Well, we got all of our edging in, and we were able to fill in sod over in this empty area with some of the sod that we took out right over here. And now's a real good time to make any amendments to the soil in terms of drainage or chemical composition. I'll tell you, with what we're working here, we're going to be fine.
Yeah, all we're doing is adding black dirt to build up the soil against the house and then slope it down away from the house. This keeps rainwater from pooling up against the foundation. With a big project like this, it's not a bad idea to have a couple yards of black dirt on hand.
If you're stuck with some miserable-looking topsoil, you can improve it by adding some black dirt to it, compost, or peat moss, which is what we're going to need here.
At this point, we're not figuring a lot of flowers, but in this bed, we're putting in a ground cover known as Pachysandra. Now, the nursery recommends that we first prepare the soil by mixing in about 4 inches of peat moss.
Now, you don't want to work with this stuff in the wind. So I'll tell you, it'll be gone in no time. What we're going to do is just spread it around the dirt here, and we'll work it in with a rototiller. What it'll do is just keep the soil nice and loose so the roots of the ground cover can spread out real nicely and evenly.
If you've never planted bare root shrubs before, then pay close attention, because they're different from planting any other form. First of all, you want to take a plant off the bundle, just one at a time, and then cover the rest back up so they don't dry out. And then before putting them in the hole, cut about a 1/4 inch off the end of each root. And this is to promote new growth.
You want the hole about 6 inches wider and 6 inches deeper than the roots themselves, so these holes aren't exactly going to be massive. You also want the crown of the plant, that's the area right where the roots start, to be right at the surface level.
Okay, that should do it. As soon as you get the right depth, you want to make a mound of dirt on the bottom of the hole for the root mass to sit on. Now, it should be high enough so that the crown is just above ground level, or 2 to 4 inches higher if you're planning on having mulch. How's that?
A stick laying across the hole will help you determine how high it should be. Okay, that looks pretty good there.
Then you fill the hole halfway with soil. Pour water over that to help it settle. These are going to need a lot of water the first week. And this is just the first drink.
Well, now's a good chance to reposition the plant and then bring in the rest of the soil and just place it nice and firmly up against the roots. And these are really the basic steps in planting bare root stock.
As a final step, they say it's essential to heavily prune the plant to help reduce the shock of replanting. They recommend cutting about 1/3 to 1/2 of all the branches off. But since this plant is going to be pruned as a hedge, we'll wait until they're all planted and then prune them all at the same time.
Well, the strange thing about bare root stock is you can compact so many plants together in one little area like this. In fact, we were talking to one of the guys at the nursery, and he was saying people will call up to order 3 plants. By the time they get into their house, they think they've got just 1 plant, and they'll end up sticking 3 of them into one hole.
Okay, we've moved ahead and got all the forsythia planted. What I'm doing now is trimming them off as recommended. You want your hedges to be wider on the bottom than they are at the top, slanted on both sides, so you cut them at an angle. This promotes leaf growth throughout the entire plant. It makes a nice full hedge. Now, it doesn't look like we're doing much because the plants are so small, but it's good to start training a hedge right off the bat.
A lot easier than the last one, huh?
Yeah.
Can you get a good grip here?
Yep.
All right, we're off.
It's a good idea to put the bigger plants in first and then plant the smaller ones in around it. That's if you've got any strength left. That's why we're starting today with the trees.
Now, these bald burlap plants have got to be some of the most awkward things to haul around here. Ideally, it'd be great to have the nursery set it right next to where you want it, but it's not an ideal world, so hauling it around this tarp is probably one of the best things to do. Okay, there we go.
There we go. Oh, that was heavy. Okay. Now, what you don't want to do is carry the tree around by the trunk. It could damage the root ball. You could get away with rolling the ball a few feet, but that could crush the roots, so be very careful.
Now, this is one of the 4 hawthorns we're going to be putting up here in the front yard. It's going to serve to anchor this end of the bed here.
Now, we're following the plan really closely. Rosalie laid out the plants knowing just how big they were going to get at maturity. So we want to plant pretty much according to this plan.
Being off a couple feet on a tree like this in a bed this size may not seem like that big a deal. But if you're in the wrong spot, as the tree goes larger, the branches may end up lapping up against the siding, or some of the other shrubs become more mature. It may become more obvious that, in fact, you've got it in the wrong spot.
7.5 feet to the left,
Okay.
and then 4 feet out.
All right, now it's a little difficult sometimes to come up with the exact angle to locate this off the house, so the easiest thing to do is to measure off straight off the front of the house and then come out at a 90-degree angle. What was that, 4 feet?
Yep.
That's by far and away the most accurate way to locate it, right there.
Okay. By the way, you never know when you're going to run into electrical, sewer, or water lines, so always make sure to check with your local utility companies before digging in your yard. We're okay here, but we do have an electrical line in the backyard we'll have to watch out for.
There you go.
Okay, right about
That should be good.
there, yeah.
So,
It's pretty big.
I'll take a quick measurement here.
We've heard a lot of different suggestions on how big to dig the hole for trees. Now, the nursery sent along these instructions, which should be pretty accurate because they guarantee their plants 100%. They recommend digging the hole 6 inches wider than the root ball. For the depth, they say that the top of the root ball should be 3 to 4 inches above ground level if you're adding mulch. If not, it should be just a little higher than ground level.
Now, you really don't want to eyeball these things. What you can do is take a board, lay that across the hole, and then measure down from it. Okay, what do we got here? 9.5. Yeah, the last thing you want to do is dig the hole, throw the ball in, and then find out that it isn't quite deep enough. It can be a little difficult to get back out. You want to help me muscle this thing in?
Oh, sure. Okay.
Just, oh boy, have to get underneath that a little bit more.
Okay, here.
There we go. Boy, those spines are sharp,
Yeah,
aren't
here. Okay, here. Go.
they?
Make sure it's straight. Does that look straight? Or
Not
looks a
quite.
little crooked? The burlap burlap's biodegradable, so you can actually leave it on after planting, except on the top. You should pull it back there to expose the surface and fold the burlap down the sides. Otherwise, it'll wick moisture away from the ball.
Now you just start filling up the hole here with dirt about halfway up the root ball. At this point, you might be tempted to fertilize, but you don't want to do that on trees the first year. Fertilizer just encourages leaf growth. The first year on trees, you want to encourage root growth.
Regular fertilizers can also burn the roots, but there are slow-release fertilizers that work over a 3-year period. The nursery sells them in these packets, and they're developed by the University of Wisconsin, and you just throw them right into the planting hole. Now that's if you're concerned about your soil's nutrients, but we're not. Ours is fine.
If you've got a heavy clay soil, some growers recommend mixing this backfill with peat moss to create kind of an intermediate zone for the roots to grow through between a good nursery soil and hard clay. And usually, your existing soil is going to be just fine.
Once the hole is filled up halfway, you want to soak it real good with water. This packs down the soil and makes sure that the roots are getting adequate moisture. And to remove any air pockets, just jab the hose in and out of the soil around the root ball. It looks funny, but it'll help the roots.
Now at this point, if things are looking a little lopsided, you can do some adjustment, but actually this looks pretty good, so just fill in the rest of the dirt.
Well, now that we have the hole filled, we're forming a basin around the root ball with the extra soil. This will pool water over the root ball, which needs a lot of moisture the first week.
Once the basin's all set, then you can water it to soak the root ball real well. Now, you don't have to worry about overwatering the first week. If anything, you have to worry about not getting enough moisture.
Well, now that you have an idea of how to plant a balled and burlap tree, we've got about 6 more to put in. So I'm going to go ahead and measure those, and then we can dig them.
Well, we got all the trees in, so I think we're going to call it quits for the day. But before we stop, we want to talk a little bit about pruning. Now, once the trees are in the ground, it's a good idea to cut some of the branches back. But before you do this, it helps to take a look at a catalog to see what this tree is going to look like once it's mature. What you might look for are any branches that are too low on the trunks. Now remember, the branches stay at their initial height no matter how high the tree grows. But one rule of thumb is to leave the stems clear up to 1/3 of the overall height. Also, look for any crossing or inward growing branches, here we go, and cut those off so they don't choke each other off. And be sure to remove any dead or broken branches like this. Try to cut them off just above an outward growing branch to promote spreading.
As we said earlier, we're going to keep these trees well watered during the next week. And before we call it a day, we're also going to give the shrubs a good soak. We're going to start planting those tomorrow.
Pruning balled and burlap trees isn't mandatory, but by thinning out some of the branches and improving the overall shape, it will help the tree's appearance. Plus, then the roots can concentrate their nourishment on areas where you'd really like to see the tree grow.
I think this should work out fine.
See, are those a little close together?
Didn't we have this discussion the other day?
Well, I just don't want to get them too crowded.
Well, this is just what Rosalie had on the plan. Besides, I think they look kind of lost and alone if they're too far apart.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Plus, I suppose we can always prune them back if they start looking a little too tight together here.
Right. We think it's a good idea to try out your plan before you actually start to do any digging. Just place the plants in the beds where they're supposed to go.
Well, this is also a good technique if you're just working with a few plants and not a big plan. It gives you a good idea of how everything's going to look all together.
True, but you want to think ahead a few years to what your plants are going to look like as soon as they mature. Like here up against the house, we don't want our foundation plantings to get too tall because of these low windows. These intermedia yews can get 3 to 5 feet tall, but they respond well to shearing, so we can keep them cut as low as we want. Okay, will you check that for me? That's a lot closer. The steps involved in planting a balled and burlap shrub are basically the same as what we told you yesterday for planting trees, starting with the hole being 6 inches wider than the ball.
And where the ball sits in the hole depends on whether or not you're going to mulch. In this area, we're going to be putting in 4 inches of mulch. So when everything's all said and done, we want the top of the mulch be level with the top of the root ball.
How does it look? Is it raining too much?
Now we just pull this twine off and then peel back the burlap to expose the top like we did on the trees.
Okay, I can finish this. It's not really necessary to add fertilizer for shrubs either, but you could put in a slow-release fertilizer at this point. Now we just backfill it halfway, water it, finish backfilling it, and then form a basin on the top.
We'll be pruning the shrubs just like we did the trees, but we'll wait until everything's in the ground. The next thing to go in now are these spirea. These are container grown, but digging the hole is the same as doing the balled and burlap. You want it 6 inches wider than the container, and a depth that leaves the surface of the root ball just a little higher than the finished surface of the bed.
The main difference with container plants is that you need to take the container off the root ball. For smaller plants like this, these 1 or 2 gallon that we have, place your hand on the root ball around the crown to support the plant. Tip it upside down and tap the sides of the container until it's loosened up. Take the container off the root ball, right like that, but don't drop the root ball, you could damage it. These container-grown roots tend to grow in circles. So before planting, take a knife and make 4 or 5 vertical cuts like this to get the roots growing out again. Then it's ready to go in the hole.
Okay, we're all set.
Now, the rest is the same as for balled and burlap shrubs. Backfilling, watering, and building a basin for water above the root ball.
Well, be sure to check the moisture on these before you plant them. If they're too dry, when you flip them upside down, they could fall apart. In fact, it's a good idea the night before to take all your container-grown plants and water them so they're all set to go the next day. Now, these range in sizes from 1 to 7 gallons. Now, the larger ones, you're not going to be able to just flip upside down and hold on when they're going to be too big. So as an example, lay them on their side, tap the sides of the container, and then just slide the container off, about like that. Go ahead and cut the root ball, you're all ready to plant them. Well, we planted all of our shrubs yesterday. Now we just have a couple of things left to do. One is to cover all of our planting beds in 4 inches of hardwood bark mulch.
One of the main reasons for adding mulch is to discourage weed growth in between your trees and shrubs. With an organic mulch like this, you need to add a full 3 or 4 inches to stifle the weeds. Otherwise, they just keep popping back up without any trouble at all.
Now, one thing about organic mulch is it does decompose over time, so you have to do a little replacing every now and again. Another option is rock mulch, but there you have to put some type of weed barrier underneath so the weeds aren't sprouting up through the rocks. And make sure you don't use plastic because then water can't get through to the plants. Instead, use something like landscape fabric that still allows water to soak through.
We're leaning toward organic mulch because in hot weather, it keeps the soil relatively cool, and it holds its moisture better than rock mulches, so we don't have to water as often.
We want the mulch to pretty much reflect the contours of these basins, keep water pooling over the roots. And remember, we planted all these pretty high, so the crown of each plant is just a little bit above the surface of the finished mulch. That's what we mean by that. Oh, okay, not too much, not on top of the basin.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, back that up.
Oh,
Just a little bit.
okay, here.
That's good there.
How's that?
Yeah, just maybe
Okay.
the rest of it. Perfect.
Okay. All right. There you go. We're making a walkway in this bed with concrete paver blocks. We're just pressing them into the dirt a little bit to hold them in place, and then we'll put mulch around them. It's not the most permanent walkway, but it matches the informal style we have here.
Yeah, this area here doesn't get much sun, so it's going to be real difficult to grow grass. So we just kind of turn the whole area into plantings with buckthorns, yews, and a few hostas. Ready for the next one?
Yep. There we go.
Okay, what do you think? Keep going straight pretty much, right?
Probably.
We ended up ordering 15 cubic yards of mulch, which may seem a little unreasonable, but when you think that our beds are 4 inches deep and it takes a cubic yard for every 80 square feet of beds at that depth, really we should have the right amount here. Now you can get this stuff in bags, but on a job this size, really about the only thing that makes any sense is to have a truck deliver it, dump it off in your driveway here, and then just scoop it up as you need it.
If you go with organic mulch, the actual material will vary depending on the part of the country that you live. Like I like that cypress bark mulch. It's a really light colored mulch, but it's expensive here because I have to ship it from down south. Now down there it's cheaper and it's a lot more popular. Right here? Yeah. Right there. They use a lot of pine needles in areas like Texas and Florida. Down there they call it pine straw, and it's pretty inexpensive. We heard it smells really great too, but we haven't used it ourselves. The point is, you should be able to find an inexpensive mulch made in your area.
Well, we're working with a process mulch, which basically means it's been turned into strips and shredded. Now, working with a process mulch is the best. It has a tendency to hold together a little bit more, so if you get a real heavy rain, you don't have to worry about the mulch, especially on a grade like this, sliding down the lower areas and leaving all the dirt exposed.
I'll get some more up in this area. Okay. That hardwood mulch is going in all the beds except this one, where we put the pachysandra ground cover. Okay. Here we're putting cocoa bean mulch, which also covers the soil, but it's lighter, so it doesn't keep the ground cover from spreading out. As you might have guessed, cocoa beans are not native to this area, so it does have to be imported. It's a pleasure spreading this stuff, though, because it does smell like chocolate chips.
Well, we're just about done with our mulch here. Now, what I'd like to do is show you some of the things we've done back here to illustrate some of the goals of landscaping. Well, first of all, we've created some new views for the windows back here. In the past, all you saw was this plain fence, and there was an old brick fireplace. Now we've created a new bed, so when you look out the windows, you can see that. This air conditioner used to stick out like a sore thumb, so by adding these 4 shrubs here, we pretty well disguised that. And the side of the house is real plain, so we dress that up a little bit using 4 buckthorns and add a little bit of color with a plum tree.
Just one more reminder before we wrap things up. Keep a close eye on your plants during the first week to make sure that they don't dry out. After the first week, you can cut back on the water to about 1 inch a week, or less if it's raining.
To check them, just dig down the dirt a couple of inches. If it feels kind of dry, well, it's probably time to water. Well, good luck on all your projects. Thanks for watching.
Hometime is made possible by Chevy full-size pickup, the most dependable, longest-lasting full-size pickup on the road. The national PBS series Hometime is made possible by the Stanley Works. Since 1843, Stanley has been committed to building quality tools and other products to help you do things right.